Hello, welcome back. It's Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony. Thanks for joining me again. Just thought I'd check in here. Today is Monday, November 30th. It's about 3:30 a local time where I'm at right now. And we are in the midst of eclipse season. So we just had a lunar eclipse last night. We can look over here. And again, I'm using this Planet Watcher software at their website. Really great software if you know how to interpret the planets without having to have a description, because it really sets out exactly when and where the planets will be. And so I'm going to click right here on the left hand side. That was the exact time of the eclipse. So local time for me, Eastern time in the US, about 4:42 a.m. this morning. That was when the full moon was peaking, and in this case it was an eclipsed full moon. And we get the eclipses a couple times a year. Very important. They're a little more potent than a typical full moon or a new moon in the case of a solar eclipse, and they tend to relate to major shifts. I always think of it as the train tracks shifting quite a bit, and so that's what we're in now. So it starts today, and in a couple of weeks, if we go forward in time here, we're going to have this solar eclipse coming up on the 14th, Monday the 14th of December, and that's going to be at about 23 degrees Sagittarius. You can see that there. So we'll talk about that in a second as well. So that'll be the main theme of this little discussion here, is going to be these eclipses. But I also want to talk about what's going to come up after this eclipse. In fact, that's a very busy week for um, important configurations that are going to happen. So immediately following that eclipse, the big one being what I've been talking about here in some previous videos, is Jupiter and Saturn will be close enough to a conjunction to be within 1 degree. And they're going to be both moving from Capricorn into Aquarius about a week later, about a week after this, on the solstice. So we go forward in time just a bit here, you can see. So on the 14th, we have that eclipse. If you click on here, the 17th, that Thursday, Saturn enters Aquarius, and then a couple days later, we have Jupiter entering Aquarius, and then on that same day, we have Mercury and the Sun conjuncting in Sag, and so that goes back to when they were conjunct when Mercury was just retrograde in Scorpio, and so it has something to do with that energy too, which we'll talk about. So that's a busy week coming up between the 14th, that eclipse, going to the 19th there, but then also we have the solstice on the morning of the 21st, and then a few hours later, we have that conjunction. The grand conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn happens once every 20 years. This particular conjunction, they're going to be closer to each other than they have been since, I believe it was March of 1226, so almost 800 years ago was the last time that Jupiter and Saturn were in a conjunction as close as they'll be this time around. And so if it's gonna, it should be visible that evening, I believe, yeah, just before sunset. And so, or I should say just after sunset, it'll be visible in the evening on that Monday, depending on if the clouds are in the sky or not. But that should be a pretty neat sight with the two relatively bright stars very close to each other. I mean, they're planets, not stars, but they look like stars to us from the Earth. And so this is a very significant transit. So this is not a small deal. Okay. Um, and being in Aquarius, I think the last time Jupiter and Saturn actually joined in Aquarius was, I think, the year 1405. So again, going back to like the Middle Ages here, about 600 years for the last conjunction in Aquarius, and about 800 years for the last time they were so close to each other. And we'll get more into the details of that here in just a minute. And so again, this is all happening within about a week's time, just a couple of weeks from now, 2 to 3 weeks from now. So a very potent time astrologically. And then also on the heels of that, a couple of days later, we have the final square between Mars in Aries and Pluto in Capricorn. And I've been talking about this since the summer, whereas this is kind of representing that battle between the old guard and the new reality. And so this is really representative of the end of this. We're coming to an end to that as well. And then I also want to talk about the following month when we get into January, say the late part of January, early February, we're going to see the north node of the moon. See it right here? That is going to be squaring Neptune. Okay, for a few weeks it'll be an exact, within 1 degree of a conjunction. And I want to talk about that because we had something similar happening in November of 2016, where in that case, the North Node was opposite Neptune. So Neptune was in Pisces then, but the North Node was opposite. So the last time, in other words, that Neptune was in a hard aspect to the moon's nodes was in November 2016. And so we'll talk about the significance of where we were then and where we will be here in late January, early February. Okay, and you might already have some ideas of what that might look like or seem like. Anyway, so if we come back to now, here we are. Once it clicks back, there it is. So we just had that eclipse again this morning at about 9 degrees. Gemini, so the moon was in Gemini 9 degrees, opposing the sun at 9 degrees Sag. And so the significance of this eclipse, if we actually just go back to it, just to highlight it there. So again, it was just this morning. And the ruler of Gemini is Mercury, and we have Mercury was making a sextile to that Jupiter-Saturn, that pending conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn is coming up. And so there is some omens to that as well. And it's this lunar eclipse really represents sort of information coming forward. And with Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, in Scorpio, we're really talking about some hidden information, some digging that's been going on with the retrograde of Mercury in Scorpio that span October into November. Essentially, that information that was dug up, it's now getting put into form for the future. Because again, this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is very, very potent, very important. And so it's an opportunity for the future to be led by what is coming out now. And with the North Node conjunct the moon as part of the eclipse, this is really saying that this is kind of a flood of information. Information is something associated with Gemini and also Sagittarius. So there's stuff, this is just beginning. So we have an eclipse that's going to have an effect for several weeks to a few months down the line. And so what this is saying is that the Pandora's box essentially is opening up here when it comes to information. What's been dug up is really gonna forge the future of where we go from here. So very significant eclipse, not to be underestimated by any means. And we go forward to the eclipse now for a couple weeks from now, on the 14th of December. This is going to be a solar eclipse. So you got the sun and moon together. It's a potent new moon essentially, and it's going to be pulling in Mercury, and it's also going to be squaring that Neptune in Pisces that I had mentioned previously, and also making that opposition to the North Node. So this is kind of setting up that relationship for the energy that comes later in January and early February. Okay, like we said, the eclipse have ripple effects. Mars in Aries, again, that battle planet, that is going to be very supportive of this eclipse as well. And with that battle planet, poised to again make its final square to Pluto about a week later, this is really again symbolizing essentially that this fight is nearing its end essentially. And so what we've been battling this entire year of 2020, it's really gonna basically, this is saying that this is supporting the fruition and completion of that battle. Okay, and this here being in Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, and again, Jupiter will be at that time within 1 degree of Saturn, just about ready to cross that threshold with Saturn into Aquarius. So both of these eclipses have something related to that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So they're really both precursors of setting the stage for what that's going to be. And this here essentially is being with the sun and moon conjunct the south node, we're talking about a release of beliefs. The Sagittarian realm rules beliefs. Okay, so beliefs of what we thought was true, having to come to terms with what we thought was true and releasing that. And this idea of kind of disillusionment and having to come to terms with the truth despite what we were made to believe is also related to this energy with the nodes in Neptune. If we go back to 2016, let's go back about mid-November. So this again was right after the election in the US when Hillary was supposed to win, right? And she didn't, and Trump won. And so at that time, you can see Neptune right there in Pisces, opposite the moon's north nodes. We have a hard aspect to the moon's node. Okay, and that lingered for a few weeks. Okay, and the way I interpreted this at the time was that it was kind of a period of disillusionment, in that what the media was telling us, what we're supposed to see as a result, right up to the day of the election, essentially, didn't really pan out. And so now it kind of left people in a well, what happens next kind of energy. Like, where do we go from here, right? There's lots of uncertainty and lots of, again, disillusionment because it didn't match what we were told. And now we come into present time, go up a couple months until late January, early February, when we have that square happening again, which again will be highlighted by that eclipse in Sagittarius, will oppose that node in square Neptune. It's another period of disillusionment. And could we be seeing, something of a repeat effect? Only in this case, it would have to do with the inauguration, okay, which happens on January 20th. So, and it's also lots of potent energy on that day as well. So you have Mars conjunct Uranus in Taurus, and that's squaring Jupiter fresh into Aquarius, okay? So very, very societally transformative energies in that right there. So at this point, it becomes a question of like, who exactly is going to be inaugurated on January 20th? I don't think the answer is even clear at this point, in my opinion. And I think the energies are speaking to that. We could be seeing another period of disillusionment where, the media is basically saying there's President-elect Biden, and we're all expecting that to be the person inaugurated, and then maybe that doesn't happen. Okay, I'm not going to make a flat-out prediction about that, but I think it's going to be a confusing time around that inauguration in the weeks that follow the inauguration, especially because that square will get tighter between Neptune and the nodes as we move into February. Okay, and all year long, I've been talking about, and I'm going to go back to where we are now, and talking about the election, which again was on November 3rd, a few weeks ago now, and how Mercury would be turning direct, and we would have Mars retrograde at this time as well. So a real potential for shenanigans and disruptions, and I did not expect the results of the election to be found out right away, and for there to be lingering issues and problems, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we knew the mail-in ballots were going to be part of it, and that was going to cause some delays, and to what degree it couldn't be totally clear, but now we see where that has led. So we have, investigations going on into fraud and everything else. And that's exactly what you kind of expect when you have Mars retrograde in Aries, its home where it wants to move and direct, and it can't. And you have Mercury changing directions on election day. So it kind of turned out as expected, which was that, lots of confusion and things like that. The interesting part of that, speaking about, repeating situations. So if potentially this January, February is a repeat of November 2016 with the disillusionment experience on the collective, this election also reflects the 2000 election. So the last time, and I can actually fly back to 2000, the last time that Mercury was stationary direct on election day, and I think it would have been Tuesday the 7th. There it is, boom. And you can see that it was within hours of that election in 2000 between Gore and Bush, that Gore was essentially announced as the presumed projected next president. And it wasn't until mid-December that the results, or that Al Gore then conceded. Okay, so this is not unprecedented what we're experiencing this year, but this is just interesting that energetically we have the situation where the one that was initially presumed to be the winner, it was retracted, which is the energy of a Mercury retrograde. The idea of going back and redoing and reassessing, and that's what happened there in 2000. So we're potentially seeing a similar situation now. Now we're back to present time. All right, so this election is very similar to that 2000 election in terms of the Mercury stationary direct energy, and the fact that someone was initially called and then that was retracted later. And when we look at, again, what in mid-December this time around, because it was in mid-December that the concession happened, mid-December this time around is when we have our our solar eclipse, which actually lands on what is actually the scheduled date for when the electors choose the president. So the state electors have to choose the president on that date. Okay, that's the deadline. Now, who knows if that will adjust? I don't know. on paper anyway, that is the deadline for when that comes in. So, and Trump has already said that he would concede if the electors were to vote against him on that date. So, right now the lawsuits are all about stalling the certifications for the states and whatnot. But that would be the day where everyone has to certify essentially, and it's official. And we know that's a busy week, right? We got the eclipse, and then we got our conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn as they move into Aquarius a week later. And before that, we have on the 19th, that's when Mercury and the Sun will be joining together. So it's kind of like the final answer, right, of what was going on in October, November, when Mercury is retrograde around, just before the election, during the election, etc. So it's a potent time, okay? And there could be, the way I look at it, there could be changes, I think, even from that date. And then when we get to January, when there's question marks again about what is going on. Where do we go from here? That same kind of energy from November 2016, where the uncertainty existed. So what is this going to result in? I don't know exactly, but I still feel like there's lots of things to be ironed out. Nothing is cut and dry here, especially with this US election at this point, and the energies are speaking to that. But back to the potent conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. I want to kind of focus on that too, because it's such a big deal. It's like I said, it's the first time they're together in Aquarius since the early 1400s. It's the first time they're going to be this close together since the early 1200s. So it's a very potent connection, and to me, it really portends it's like a preview, in my opinion. I'm going to go for a little bit. Fine, there it is. So it's exact on the 21st, again, just a few hours after the solstice. And that Aquarian energy, 0 degrees Aquarius, it really, to me, it's a preview of when Pluto is going to enter Aquarius, which will be in the mid part of the decade, about 2024, 2025, something like that. And, you always hear about the age of Aquarius and et cetera, et cetera. And to me, this really does kind of serve as the preview foundation to open up the doors for Pluto. Now, the last time Pluto left Capricorn and entered Aquarius, it was in the midst of the American Revolution. Okay, so it was in 1778, I believe. So that was after the Declaration of Independence, but before the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation. So kind of before the official documents of the new nation. It was more, just the wartime in between the Declaration and the official documentation of nationhood. Okay, and I mentioned this in previous videos, and I'm going to mention it again. And I would also recommend going to the webinar I did recently called From Hierarchy to Sovereignty, where I talk about Regulus and the shift from Leo into Virgo and what that means and where we're at. And where it's really worth the watch to understand the bigger picture. But the way I see it for this Aquarian energy, for when Pluto enters Aquarius this time around, again, about 4 or 5 years from now, is that this is going to represent more of that move toward liberty, not just in one nation, but on a global scale. And so to me, this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that we're seeing here just in a few weeks on the 21st, on the solstice, the fact that it's on the solstice is also very powerful. And I feel like this is really setting the stage for a future of a higher degree of global liberty, which if you watch that Hierarchy to Sovereignty webinar, you'll know that this is a time where the old guard energy is really falling apart, and where the new reality based on information that has been hidden from us, okay, that changes how we see the world suddenly. And that's where we're at now, is that transition from a time where things are hidden to the times when things are revealed, and that changes everything as far as our perception. And with that change of perception, the old guard cannot hold power anymore. And so anywhere you see the old energy of super hierarchies of imbalanced power, like in communist China, for example, these are kind of destined to fail in this new energy, in this Regulus in Virgo energy that we are in. And again, I go through that in that Hierarchy to Sovereignty video. But it's this Aquarian energy that's really indicating this step toward freedom that's kind of coming here. And so if I take a step back and I look at it and going back to this US election, for example, Who is the individual between Trump and Biden that the globalist special interests, in other words, the old guard that wants totalitarian control on a global scale, which one do they prefer? And I think, the answer is very clear. They prefer Biden. And they could have chose someone else too. It doesn't really matter to them who they put in there to make sure that those plans have a chance to go through. And Trump is a thorn in their side, wasn't supposed to be there. He's getting in the way of many of the globalist plans, defunding the World Health Organization, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. These are all no-nos for the old guard. And, love or hate Trump, what he's doing relative to the old guard is a positive thing if freedom and liberty on a global scale are something people are interested in. And sometimes you need a bulldozer or a wrecking ball to destroy the old system before a new system can emerge. And that newer system doesn't necessarily have to have the kind of structure of leadership that we have now. So I always, looking at the bigger picture of, who's who in the political realm, this energy here just does not resonate with old guard collectivism, communism, those kinds of things. Doesn't resonate with that. And so it's almost like there's a destiny here. So we can look at it like either way. If I feel like if the legal process moves forward, and despite the media ignoring any developments, if Trump is then re-inaugurated in 2020, that we're going to have a more direct path toward this liberty. And he's, he'll only be there a few more years, even if he is reelected. So it has nothing to do with him, but what can open up because of the prevention of the globalist special interests. So it'd be direct intervention against that. Whereas the Biden path, whether that leads to a Kamala Harris moving in and whatnot, that has a destiny to fail, because that global order just can't resonate in the energies that we're entering in between Regulus and Virgo, and now, heading into what will be Pluto and Aquarius in a few years, and how this conjunction here is previewing that for us. So it's getting very potent, very interesting. This 2020 is going to end on as potent of an energy kind of note as it has lived itself throughout the year. So, don't put away the popcorn yet, because it's still, the show still goes on here in 2020. So with that, I think I'm going to just leave it alone. So if you have any questions, do feel free to contact me through my website, SovereignHarmony.com. You can follow me on Facebook. I do many posts on what's happening in the planets throughout the week on Facebook. And I also got Instagram too, Sovereign Harmony, but don't use that too much. It's just a little harder for me, but you can follow that too. If you have any questions, let me know. If you are interested in seeing how these planets are going to work in your chart and how that looks for you in 2021, for example, which I will be back later in December to talk about 2021 specifically. I just wanted to focus more on these eclipses and the near future, like into January here, what's on our doorstep. But I'll go deeper into what's happening in 2021 the next time around. But if you want to see what's going on for your chart 2021, do let me know. So with that, I think we will say goodbye, and we will see you next time. Enjoy the holidays, and I will probably see you just before the new year. Thanks a lot. Christopher Taylor, Sovereign Harmony. Bye-bye.